what it's been like for me is for the people who are suffering. You know, all America grieves, but those who've lost a wife or a child, their pain is even greater than ours. So we have to stand with them. We have to stand with the brave firefighters, the Port Authority teams down right now. They lost their top management. They lost dozens of their police, but they're out there. We have to stand with them. They're the ones who are going to bring us through this.
What can you say to people? I saw you just talking, but I couldn't hear what you were saying. What can you say to people here?
They're not alone. The people of New York are with them. The people of America are with them. We continue to make the search and rescue effort the highest priority. We're doing everything we can, and thousands of people are helping right now, and millions are praying right now.
The people who I've been talking to, they say that the authorities have been incredibly organized, incredibly helpful, but they say they just have no clues. Do you have any idea when they would get some clues?
We just can't give time frames or timelines. That wouldn't be right. There's never been a darker day or a greater tragedy in American history, and that's why we're doing everything we can, trying to give the people as much information as quickly as possible. But obviously nothing like this has ever happened. But we will get through it. The people are strong. They're standing shoulder to shoulder, and we will get beyond this.
Tell me, I've mostly seen here what city services have done for people. Tell me what the state of New York is doing for people, for families here.
It's been a great cooperative effort. You know, the shelter behind us is something where it's a state armory where we mobilize the National Guard. But it's not a question of this agency or that agency, the city leadership, the state government. President Bush has delivered every single thing from Washington, from the federal government we've requested. And most importantly, you see out here thousands of volunteers, people without any official role, but just here to help, and they are helping.
Thank you, Governor George Pataki. Thank you. Now back to you, Wolf.
Right now, Governor.
Thank you.
Now, what's the sort of a mission here?
Well, there's a intelligence failure of unbelievable proportions.
FBI.
We
Well, who
have
has the money?
DIA, NSA, CIA, FBI,
CIA is overseas.
police.
FBI is responsible for counterterrorism.
We are so loose at airports, it is incredible. We have no idea what it is like to be able to just walk through an airport and get on a plane with, as you pointed out earlier, a 5-inch knife or a 4-inch knife. There's going to have to be, it's a new day. Life will never be the same for any American subsequent to the 11th of this month.
But doesn't it, you travel so much, I travel a lot, and I think we pretend, we kid ourselves about safety. We ask these stupid questions when we get on airplanes.
Yeah.
Has anybody given anything to carry? Well, these guys know what the answer is.
Of course
No.
yeah.
Have you watched your possession? I sure have. I've been putting this good
Guarded
stuff
them with my life.
Yeah, well, isn't that a joke?
It is a joke.
Okay.
But it won't happen
What about those
anymore.
metal detectors? They say you can have a 4-inch knife if you want to go on an airplane.
Yeah.
What do you need a metal detector for? Oh, by the knives, bringing the knives through.
Let me take it to another level. I was talking to Jean Kirkpatrick, and she and I and Bill Bennett suggested strongly that the country should declare war on this worldwide Islamic jihad. 95% of people who practice Islam are peace-loving and God-fearing. But there is a fringe element of radical fundamentalist Islam that has to be rooted out, because you reading the papers and having a Muslim say how disgusted they are, how dangerous the moment is, how bricks are being thrown through a mosque. The scapegoating, we must be very careful not to blame every
I know that's the right answer, Jack. Look, I watched television the last 10 days.
we've got to get
all those people
serious
cheering
about
on the
rooting
West
out
Bank.
terrorism.
You say they're not all active agents or terrorists, but there's a lot of people over there cheering the loss of our lives.
Sad.
What about all those pictures of those people?
Yeah.
You can't root them out.
Well, Ben Laden declared war on the United States in 1988. He said every God-fearing Muslim should kill an American and take their possessions. At that point, we have now seen the USS Cole. We have seen 2 attacks on our embassies in Africa, and this unbelievable, horrific act in New York and Washington. It is time to get serious. I think a declaration of war is called for.
Against Ben Laden?
Absolutely.
Who else?
Absolutely. Anyone who supports his network of Al-Qaeda, the base. And that is something that the American people have to know about. We've taken it for granted.
Al Haig says to go after all Arab terrorists.
Well, we have to go against terrorists, whether they are Arab or
Well,
whatever.
we're not going after the IRA, are we?
Well, if they launch a war on the United States,
that's right. That's a big F. Jack Kemp, thank you very much. Rivera Live's up next with more on the attack on America after this update from CNBC News headquarters.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everybody. From CNBC World Headquarters, I'm Ted David. The news out today from the SEC, the NYSE, and the NASDAQ. Regular trading will resume on Monday. In the meantime, another session is about to begin in the Pacific Rim. We go live now to the Tokyo Stock Exchange and CNBC Asia Pacific Tokyo Bureau Chief Kaori Njoji. We saw a tame session yesterday, Kaori. How is it shaping up today?
Well, Ted, much more sense of normalcy and calm here in Tokyo. It's the third trading day after the tragedy in the U.S. The market is a little bit choppy, but sticking very close to yesterday's closing levels. The Nikkei 225, the benchmark, is up 50 points currently at 9,662. The broader Topix index is also managing to hold on to gains this morning, up by 11 points at 1014. The central bank, the Bank of Japan, has maintained excess liquidity in the money market system, showing its resolve to keep ample supply in the market to prevent rates from shooting up. There is mounting speculation that the central bank, the Bank of Japan, may move to ease further when its policy board meeting meets next week for 2 days. So there is a sense of normalcy here, but many businesses have canceled events and news conferences that were scheduled today to pay their respects to the U.S. Back to you, Ted.
All right, Kaori, thank you. We'll talk to you later on. Kaori Njoji in Tokyo. Meanwhile, in Australia, the All Ordinaries Index is currently trading on the downside by about 9 points at 30.6060 for a loss of about 0.25%. Now, later tonight, our global market coverage will continue. We have CNBC Asia up from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. here. Then from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. all times Eastern, CNBC Europe to give you a feel for how the markets are trading there. And as you know, they have been rather tame. Coming up at 5 a.m. Eastern time, as always, we'll have Today's Business, Liz Klayman and Bob Sellers for you. And at 7 a.m. Eastern time, Mark Haynes and the gang with Squawk Box. Again, trading to resume here in the United States on the equities markets starting on Monday. They are looking to do some dry runs or dress rehearsals a la Y2K, if you'll recall. They'll do those over the weekend. The bond market, however, traded today, closed lower. Up next, Rivera Live.
Tonight, another fast-breaking day of highly dramatic developments with the U.S. Capitol building being evacuated because of a bomb scare, Vice President Dick Cheney being taken to Camp David as a precautionary measure, and New York City's newly reopened airports closed down again due to FBI activity. Reportedly, the arrests at JFK and LaGuardia airports of 7 or 8 Middle Eastern men attempting to get on transcontinental flights with tickets originally booked for this past Tuesday. 3 reportedly produced counterfeit pilots' licenses. There were also arrests in Germany of people suspected of being involved in the plot to terrorize America, one of them a U.S. citizen. Meanwhile, the Defense Department says it is prepared for a sustained military campaign against the perpetrators of Tuesday's atrocities, a large-scale attack including land, sea, and air forces. And at the Pentagon and in lower Manhattan, courageous and exhausted rescue workers continue to risk their lives in the fading hope that anyone is still alive. As you'll see in a bit, they've received, just in the last couple of hours, a surprise visit of encouragement from former President Bill Clinton. We'll have all that plus an exclusive interview with someone who earlier today received an intriguing call from a key aide to the world's most wanted man. Yes, Osama bin Laden. All that is right now on Rivera Live.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went off. We don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always. Bye.
Thing I did, the natural thing was after I spoke with her father was to turn on the TV. Immediately I saw the North Tower billowing smoke, and you could only imagine my thoughts and fears, and then to hear my wife's message. I immediately tried to call her on her cell phone and it wouldn't go through. I later went to voicemail, and still to this point her voicemail is full.
Showing you, speaking of that heart-wrenching message left on his answering machine by his wife Melissa, who was attending a meeting on the 101st floor of One World Trade Center. Melissa Hughes visiting from San Francisco now, one of the nearly 5,000 people officially listed as missing, a number that may rise in the days to come. New York's Mayor Giuliani, in fact, has requested 11,000 body bags to be ready in case it comes to that, as his shell-shocked, debris-strewn, and grief-stricken city remains on high alert. Hi, but I'm Geraldo Rivera, still stuck in L.A. 60 hours later, the air still carries the stink of the sneak attack that began the first American war of the 21st century. The mountain of still smoldering rubble in downtown Manhattan said now to contain the crushed and shattered remains of more than 4,700 victims. It's grudgingly yielding the occasional miracle of life. Several firefighters feared lost have been found alive today. But the digging, clawing, increasingly desperate search effort does not now seem destined to end the pain and suffering for most of the tens of thousands of grieving relatives waiting for word of loved ones unheard from since the flying murderers destroyed the Trade Center and perhaps our comfortable, confident way of life. And nerves are compounding grief. New York and Washington are rattled, shaken, edgy. Police action and perverse false bomb threats are causing frequent closings of institutions of various kinds, from the private school across the street from my girls' home in Manhattan to the Capitol building, the White House itself in D.C. Buildings are opened only to be closed. Commercial flights are started only to be stopped. Sirens pierce air still filled with the dust of disaster, and our anger brims at the bastards who have wrought this awful travail. And the head bastard, to no one's surprise, is Osama bin Laden. Tonight, U.S. government sources tell NBC News that based on overwhelming evidence, the Bush administration has determined that bin Laden, the master terrorist, is directly responsible for Tuesday's devastation. Federal investigators also say tonight they believe 18 hijackers were involved in the attacks. The FBI says all their names are known, a fact that provides the biggest leads in this rapidly moving investigation. They figure about 50 now total people involved in the conspiracy. And as NBC's Pete Williams reports, it is an investigation now on two fronts, identifying who carried out the attacks and those who survived, those who helped them. Here's Pete.
New details tonight about how the hijackers spread out to take over the 4 planes that crashed Tuesday. 5 each, the FBI says, on the 2 planes that left Boston and flew into the World Trade Center towers. And 4 on each of the other 2, the one from Washington Dulles that crashed into the Pentagon and the plane that left Newark and crash-landed in Pennsylvania. 18 hijackers in all. Tonight, the Justice Department plans to release the names of all 18, along with pictures of those for which the FBI can find confirmed photographs. Federal officials tell NBC News they now believe the suicide flights were at least 2 years in the planning. A picture emerging as tips come flooding in.
The FBI's Leads hotline has received 2,055 phone calls. Some of these leads have been helpful to the investigation. The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips.
Federal agents are now investigating whether some of the hijackers got jet training at this flight school in Minneapolis. Government officials tell NBC News that just last month, a man of Middle Eastern descent was detained there on immigration charges after instructors at the school became suspicious when the man offered a large sum of cash in return for training in the school's jet flight simulator. Agents also rushed to a flight school in western Michigan to see whether any of the hijackers might have trained there. In Boston, investigators find an airport employee tarmac pass in that car driven by 2 of the suspected hijackers, generating new questions for the FBI about whether the hijackers had any inside help. The FBI's new director says finding associates of the hijackers is a top priority for federal agents.
They are, where necessary, obtaining search warrants, obtaining grand jury subpoenas, and whatever is necessary to obtain the evidence to identify more particularly identify the particular hijackers and anyone associated with them.
A sign today that the investigation is truly worldwide, as German authorities, acting on a tip from the FBI, detain an American at the Hamburg airport for questioning. U.S. officials tell NBC News the man, originally from Yemen, carried an airline ticket for destinations in cities throughout Europe.
All right, Pete Williams, thank you. We're now informed, a little update, that the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, has decided not to release those photos just yet. The second they do, I swear to God, folks, we'll get them to you. Commissioner Raymond Kelly, former police commissioner of New York City, former commissioner of U.S. Customs. What the hell do you make of the 7 to 8 Middle Eastern gentlemen, apparently with tickets purchased on Tuesday, 3 of them with counterfeit pilots' licenses being seized reportedly at LaGuardia and JFK?
Well, of course, we need more information, but it looks like the FBI was on the job, was alert, and quite possibly prevented another tragedy. I mean, what is so shocking here is so many people have volunteered, if you will. They're going to give up their lives to hurt America in such a dastardly way. So,
but what a long shot, Commish. I mean, let's face it. Didn't they think we'd be watching? If in fact this report pans out to be true, didn't they think we'd be watching? Did they really think that they could take Tuesday's ticket and say, "Let me on board. I want to die like my brothers did"?
Well, it shows that apparently they have much regard for our security efforts, and again, they did very little. The ones who died, to cover up their tracks. I mean, these are zealots, and they're going to try. And I think this is a wake-up call for us, an opportunity to do a whole rethinking of how we gather intelligence, how we defend ourselves, how we protect ourselves at airports. I think we have to use this as an opportunity.
Let me introduce all my guests. In New York City, this, of course, the city's former police commissioner, Raymond Kelly. He later served as U.S. Customs Commissioner, as I said. Commissioner Kelly's leadership as New York's top cop was considered critical in the successful investigation of the first World Trade Center bombing back in '93. Nearby the commish, one of my best buddies, retired Brigadier General Pete Dawkins, a Rhodes Scholar, Heisman Trophy winner, war hero. The general's currently a Wall Street exec. In Boston tonight, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, the prolific author whose latest highly praised bestseller, Supreme Injustice. The professor is currently working on a book about balancing civil liberties with terrorism prevention. He's also a consultant in the appeal of the conviction of one of the Libyans who bombed Pan Am Flight 103 in 1988 over Scotland. In Washington, Neil Livingston, the terrorism and crisis management expert who's authored 9 books on terrorism, security, and foreign policy. Dr. Livingston, whose wife works in the Pentagon but miraculously escaped injury on Tuesday, is chairman and CEO of the Global Options firm. We welcome for the first time retired FBI Special Agent Christopher Whitcomb, an expert in terrorism and mass destruction attacks, who participated in every major federal investigation over the past decade, including the first WTC bombing. He's the author of Cold Zero, Inside the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team. And I must mention that both Agent Whitcomb and Dr. Livingston lost a close friend on Tuesday, a man named John O'Neill. Chris, tell us about John O'Neill.
Well, John O'Neill, I met and got to know really during the USS Cole investigation about a year ago when we went to Yemen. He spearheaded, or he ran that investigation in Yemen. Went through an awful lot there, and I thought it was gravely ironic that he ended up in this disaster at the World Trade Center right after retiring from the FBI.
So he did the Cole investigation, he retired. 3 days later, he's working security at the World Trade Center.
Yeah, just started on the job and ends up in this disaster.
What is that? You know, this thing, Christopher, has gotten Americans. There's flags coming out of every window now. You know, it's such an emotional moment for all of the United States. What happens to a guy like you who gets a friend taken out? I mean, what's that gut shot like?
Well, I mean, there's no end to this tragedy. I mean, you can talk to anyone across the country. I've talked to relatives in California, all over the country. Almost everyone knows someone or has a relative or someone is affected by this thing. It's just, you know, this struck me when John went down in that tower, that someone could devote their life to fighting this, retire from the FBI, and then fall victim to it just a few days later. There's no end to the stories of tragedy in this thing.
You know, General Dawkins, you're used to fighting an enemy who presumably, however heroic, wants to survive. Now we're facing people who, if these airport arrests turn out to be true, that not only were they kamikazes last Tuesday, but they're still trying to sacrifice, even when the odds are nil to nothing. You know, how do you fight an enemy like this?
Well, they are kamikazes, and they're zealots, and they're crazed, and what they perpetrated was mass murder. And it's a heinous crime, and it's you know, and we're outraged as a nation about it, as we should be, and I hope filled with an increased amount of determination to take a stand and take aggressive action about it. And I'll tell you, Geraldo, it's not just something out there. It's very personal. My daughter, who you know well, was 6 blocks away when the first plane hit, had a film crew out, actually took some film of the second plane hitting. I had to order her out of the area because she was going to stay in there. And I'll tell you another ironic piece of this, why it hits everyone so in their own personal way. 30 years ago during Vietnam, my wife and I spent time counseling the families of soldiers who'd been killed in Vietnam and having to go visit with them. Just this week, in our hometown of Rumson, Geraldo, where you and I shared many, many times together, we're once again on the vigil of going out to meet with neighbors and friends. And never did I conceive that we would be back in that mode again. This is a terrible moment.
15 parents from my girls' old school there said to be among the missing, presumed dead. Neil Livingston, your wife, lucky, just lucky.
She was very lucky. She was in what is known as the death zone in the reports today, giving a speech. She said she took one final question, and if she hadn't taken that question, she would have been in the hallway, which was impacted immediately. She was in a room that had recently been reconstructed with new beams that were designed to last 15 minutes in the event of a major bomb blast, and they held just that long. The room no longer exists, and there was flame everywhere. All of their exits were blocked by flame. And she said there were a couple of real heroes. There was smoke everywhere, the lights were out, the sprinklers weren't working, and someone kept yelling, this way, and at peril to his own life. And another man lay on the floor where the air was good and helped people along the way. And she said if it hadn't been for that, she wouldn't have made it.
Let me ask Alan Dershowitz. You've consulted Canada. It seems that that leaky border is part of the problem here. I'm not putting any blame on the Canadians. I don't think anyone could have prevented a suicide attack of this magnitude. But how do we stop this?
Well, we have to use calibrated, rational, smart approaches, unemotional. We're all emotional. We all feel very strongly about this. The first thing to do is catch the sons of bitches, put them on trial fairly, make sure they're convicted. I am volunteering today my services to put together a team of experienced defense lawyers to work with the Justice Department prosecutors to help them anticipate the kinds of arguments that other defense lawyers will make so that we can avoid making the kinds of mistakes that prosecutors have made in the past. We all are in this together, and we have to be smart. We have to look to rational approaches. We have to make sure we don't lump together all Muslims or Arabs. On the other hand, we have to understand this was not just bin Laden or one group. There is a culture of hate among many, not most, but many Islamic fundamentalists who have taught their children to hate America, to hate Jews, to hate Christians. And this is something that we have to root out. You know, this makes possible far worse things. Until, yes, the other day, none of us imagined 10,000 or so people perhaps could be killed. Now we can imagine nuclear disaster, biological disaster. We have to understand this is essentially a state of emergency, but we don't have to eliminate civil liberties in order to smartly put an end to this. But this is a long-term issue that we have to be prepared to confront.
Officials in Washington, ladies and gentlemen, say that the Bush administration is pressuring Pakistan to close its borders with Afghanistan, stop supplying Afghanistan's Taliban government, and perhaps most controversially, to allow flights over Pakistani airspace in the event of an American strike against the terrorists Osama bin Laden and his cronies in neighboring Afghanistan. We're joined now on the telephone from Pakistan by Hussein Haqqani. He's a Karachi-based political analyst and columnist. Mr. Haqqani is a former advisor to 2 Pakistani prime ministers. He is himself a former ambassador from the nation of Pakistan. He is a friend of mine. Ambassador Haqqani, welcome. Please tell me about this call you received today from this associate of Osama bin Laden. First of all, who is this guy?
Well, Geraldo, this is a guy who was involved in the anti-Soviet resistance in Afghanistan at one point when volunteers from all over the world were coming into Afghanistan to fight the Soviet occupation. And at that time, of course, many in the West considered these people their allies. But this man then went off on a tangent. He has spawned a mindset among the Muslims of hate, of terrorism. He justifies that. And even if, I mean, people are talking about finding a smoking gun in this particular instance, but even if they don't find a smoking gun linking Osama bin Laden to these particular attacks, which may be difficult because his organization is not like a structured organization. It's not like a New York-based company which has a chief executive officer with paper and a paper trail. No. These are cells which are independently organized, which attack with ferocity in various parts of the world. But the most important point is that Osama bin Laden is a man who has inspired terrorism among Muslims. And he has always argued that even civilians are legitimate targets. He seems to be a little scared now.
Well, tell me about that, Mr. Ambassador. Tell me about his fear. Is the saber rattling over here being heard over there?
It is definitely being heard. Osama apparently is in touch with the world with a modern communication system. Even
so wait, hold it right there, Ambassador. The Taliban government in Afghanistan maintains to all the world that they have cut off Osama bin Laden's communications to the outside world. Are you saying that's a lie?
Well, we cannot say for sure what is the status, but there is a presumption among people in Pakistan, who, by the way, share the grief and anger of the Americans. Most Pakistanis, and there have been Pakistani casualties in this incident. There are many Pakistanis, there are many Muslims in the United States, and a lot of us share the grief, share the anger of the American people. Now, most people believe that there are contradictions in the Taliban statements. The Taliban, on the one hand, say that there are no communications available to Osama and his aides, but then there are also news reports in the Pakistani media of these aides calling up journalists and media people.
Someone called you.
These people.
He called you.
One of these people called me. Of course, I had made his acquaintance. He was also a journalist covering the Afghan war, as I was during the anti-Soviet resistance. And he called me. And he, of course, was trying to make the point that Osama may not be directly linked, that it may be difficult to prove. And the point I made to him was that it's not about proving. It's not like a normal kidnapping or murder case in downtown New York. It's about a mass murder in which basically what we are looking at is the whole pattern and his contribution to creating a mindset which basically is totally incompatible even with the values of Islam. That mindset is what is spawning all of this.
But let me ask you this. But Hussein, let me ask you very directly. What makes you think Osama bin Laden is afraid?
Well, this man actually said that of all the things that we've contemplated, we have never contemplated direct war with the United States. Now, let me explain that to you. The United States in the past has used...
Hello? Hussein? Oh,
Afghanistan is...
Okay, here he is. Go ahead, Ambassador. We lost you for a time. Go ahead.
Okay. Afghanistan has territory in which it's very easy to hide. So far, these people always thought that if there are cruise missile attacks, etc., and Osama keeps moving, he may not be hit. This time, there is a possibility of more sophisticated operations. People are talking about airstrikes, but there might even be a ground invasion. And there might be more sophisticated involvement of Pakistan. Pakistan is already under pressure, although Pakistan has not cooperated to the extent that the United States has wanted in the past. But now Pakistan's intelligence chief is in Washington as we speak, and he's being told by the Americans that we want all your intelligence on Afghanistan and on Osama bin Laden. Now, if that comes about, then of course, the fear that he will either be apprehended or identified or taken out becomes very rare. These guys have always thought that they will strike terror inside the United States or at American targets outside the United States, but they have never thought of coming under attack in a very major way, with the whole world coming down on them, the way that they face now.
Okay, so hang in there, Mr. Ambassador. Let me go right to General Dawkins and say, what's it take, General?
Well, I think the ambassador's right. This is a new circumstance, and I think we need to pursue it forcefully. What it will take, it's not easy, Geraldo, you know, it's tremendously difficult. We've got to make the case. I think that's being done right now. We've got to get a lot of people in support of us. NATO, which appears to be in case, the stands, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all the stands need to be there for air bases. We do need Pakistan because it has that common border. It has railroads coming in. If we're going to have manned aircraft attacks, if we're going to insert commando units, if we are going to go after, hunt down, and destroy not only Osama bin Laden, but his group, we've got to have a lot of support. We've got to have the Russian support, not only in willingness of things they'll let us do, but in things they need to do. And if we can marshal that kind of pattern of support and go at this, to go in, destroy the organization, and move out, then I believe we have the capacity to do it. It's very tough, but I believe what the ambassador said is the key to it. We've got to change the rules. We've got to not give them sanctuary where they can just stand back and create these kinds of travesties upon us.
Geraldo, one way we have to think about changing the rules, and this is going to sound strange coming from a civil libertarian, we have to seriously think about going back to targeted, preventive assassination of known terrorists who are in the process of preparing for ongoing terrorist activities. We knew that bin Laden was training pilots not far from Kabul. We knew the kinds of planes he was using to train pilots. If we have moved in preventively, surgically, and smartly to stop this from happening, we could have saved thousands of lives. Instead, now we're thinking of retaliation. Retaliation is necessary, but it's only second best to prevention. So we have to think about changing the statutes, but having very carefully defined circumstances under which this is permitted.
I agree with all that. Let me just go to Commissioner Kelly on this prevention notion. Aren't you grievously disappointed with airport security that 4 commercial aircraft, God knows, let me just say this in fairness, God knows how many teams they tried to insert into how many aircraft, but they did succeed in getting on board 4 commercial airliners, all leaving at about the same time from 2 major northeastern hubs, and 3 to 5 or 6 thugs per aircraft. True, they all had carpet knives, but you know, if you have 6 Arab guys with carpet knives getting on the plane, shouldn't some relatively astute person say, hey, wait a second, maybe they're not laying carpet in California?
As far as I can see, they were 4 for 4. They were 100% successful. And you know, in the 70s when we first started monitoring who was going on aircraft using magnetometers, we had law enforcement personnel doing that. That's long since died and dissipated. We now have people who mean well, but they're entry-level personnel. The turnover is tremendous. We know that the FAA tests regularly these airport sites, and they fail consistently, and yet nothing really has been done about it. And again, maybe this is the wake-up call, the opportunity to change that. We can't go on the way we've been going. That's for sure.
We're looking. There's a live picture. There's a live picture, ladies and gentlemen. We're looking at a live picture. Those men and women, the rescue workers, the vast majority of them volunteers, some from all over the country. I know there are 3 teams in there from California alone. They're from all over. New Jersey has responded. They're crawling all over that wreckage. They did pull the 3 firemen out of there. I just get this tape CC ready. I just want familiar face down there cheering people up. President Clinton, in a surprise, he took a military flight. I spoke to his aide earlier. I hope the president himself will call. Here it is. Charisma unmatched. They're welcoming him back. You know, I saw him giving that patented Clinton hug to many of the devastated relatives, trying to give them some assurance, even though the situation, obviously, as you know, folks, as every minute passes, increasingly grim, that any of the original victims will be dug out alive. I understand the firemen rescued today were caught in a blast, in a collapse of a building much later, maybe even just this morning. But 11,000 body bags. in New York. It's just beyond belief. Christopher Whitcomb, now you have a situation where it's not so much the CIA as it is the national security apparatus and the armed forces of the United States. Do you have a position? Do you advocate? Do you have a quantity, a quality of appropriate response in mind?
Well, I think it's fascinating that we're sitting here tonight talking about the possibility of assassination. It's always baffled me how we can send a cruise missile into a city, how we can use target bombing, things like that, and suffering losses with women and children, and yet we can't stomach the idea that we could move in and sort of proactively take out the one person that's responsible for this. And I think we can look at many examples in the past 5 years where we had an opportunity really to do something like this. I mean, you go back to the Gulf War with Saddam Hussein, he's really the only one that survived that war. And you look at Osama bin Laden, one man accountable for incredible amounts of misery, and we're in a place now where we have to look at bombing Afghanistan. We're really changing the way we think about things in this country, and I think the overriding.
Well, what do you think about the fact that what happened on Tuesday has changed America? I firmly believe that what was will no longer be. Obviously, what's best in the country will survive, but there will be, as I said last night, an erosion, an inevitable erosion of civil liberties. If indeed we now we turn loose, and I agree with the whole idea of turning loose sniper squadrons to try and take out the devils who perpetrated this mass murder. But things will never be. My daughter afraid that a plane will crash through the damn ceiling in Manhattan. Pete, imagine that. Simone telling me on the telephone that she's afraid, Daddy, a plane's going to come through the elevator in the building.
That's where we are, Geraldo, and the world is different now. You know, we are a great country, a strong country. The future is bright. We will survive this, but the world will never be the same. And Alan Dershowitz, I was fascinated by and encouraged by what you said, Alan, about the fact of prevention. I don't think you're talking about prevention, though. I think you're talking about preemption,
right?
Which is going to be the critical part of this, to be able, when you have obvious confidence that a crime is going to take place, a heinous crime is going to take place, even if it hasn't yet, to then take assertive action preemptively. That's the change that I believe is going to have to take place.
I think the important thing is, you know, this is, oh, excuse me.
If I may add something, preemption will...
Go ahead, this is Ambassador Hussein Haqqani. Go ahead, Ambassador.
I was saying that preemption would require active participation of Arabs and Muslims who, even though they are upset about American foreign policy and some elements of it, but they do not like this terror. I think that the American people have to understand that they have to enroll all of them as their allies. We have to be involved, a lot of us who feel the rage, and we have to be involved in this effort because it's people quite outside of the United States who perpetrate these acts. So only people who are outside the United States and feel your pain who will be able to support you in locating these elements who are responsible for this.
Well, let me ask, hang on, Mr. Ambassador, Neil Livingston, there is no doubt you're not going to be able to put a crew-cut Marine or Delta Force guy into Afghanistan and hope that he's going to stay hidden. You're going to need someone who speaks the lingo, who knows the territory, as close to the bad guys as you can get. Is Pakistan right now, in your opinion, also in the crosshairs? If they don't, and we have, bearing in mind we have the ambassador, albeit from the former government, when there was still a democracy in Pakistan, are we going to threaten Pakistan, cooperate, or else?
Well, I think that we're having very serious talks with a number of nations, both in the Middle East, nations like Pakistan and some of our allies who have in the past allowed this climate of terror to propagate. You know, some of those very same countries that are supposed to be our NATO allies are the ones that are doing commercial transactions with terrorist-sponsoring countries that are selling them precursor chemicals for chemical weapons and so on. So we are trying to use every leverage that we have right now with other nations, and that means that if certain countries don't cooperate, I think the Congress and the American people are going to retaliate in some way, certainly not a military retaliation, but in terms of diplomatic and other efforts in the future. As far as putting troops in there, I just came from the border of Afghanistan. I was in Uzbekistan. It's a terribly mountainous area, even though bin Laden's people are more to the south. It's one of the most rugged terrains in the world. His people live in caves, if we put troops in, we're going to have to put a lot of troops in, because where he is, even other Afghans, if they're from the outside, they're regarded as strangers and potentially enemies. So if we go in there, it will be with significant amount of force, not a few isolated special operations
You're talking armies.
units.
You're not talking even brigade strength. You're talking armies. You're talking a Persian Gulf type operation.
I'm not sure I'm talking a Persian Gulf type of operation, but I think that it will be very difficult for a few small special operations units to, very far from logistical support and so on, to operate there. So I think we are talking about occupying perhaps some areas of Afghanistan.
Let me go to Jim. Jim Miklaszewski's got a report on the military options. I think this is an appropriate time to roll that. Here's Jim Miklaszewski.
Today's determination that bin Laden is the mastermind behind the devastating terrorist attacks means the U.S. will now go after bin Laden with all of America's might. In the kind of rhetoric not heard since the Gulf Wars, Secretary of State Colin Powell put whomever's responsible on notice.
We will go after that group, that network, and those who have harbored, supported, and aided that network to rip the network up.
But the U.S. won't stop there, intent apparently on also going after Afghanistan's ruling party, the Taliban, which provides sanctuary for bin Laden.
It's not just simply a matter of capturing people and holding them accountable, but removing the sanctuaries, removing the support systems, ending states who sponsor terrorism.
U.S. officials tell NBC News while no decisions have been made, all options for military strikes are on the table, including an all-out invasion. Option 1, the quickest response, airstrikes, using cruise missiles and long-range B-52 bombers. The U.S. launched a missile attack in 1998, but the elusive bin Laden escaped unharmed. 2, a sustained campaign of airstrikes launched from aircraft carriers and Allied bases in the region. 3, an airborne assault, infantry paratroopers backed by Apache attack helicopters.
I think one thing is clear is that you don't do it with just a single military strike, no matter how dramatic.
As in the days leading up to the Gulf War, the Bush administration is lining up lots of help. In a historic decision, all NATO nations will permit the U.S. military to launch airstrikes from their bases. In the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar have also opened their bases to American warplanes. Even Russia, with wartime experience in Afghanistan, is offering military and intelligence assistance, as well as Uzbekistan. U.S. airborne troops have conducted military exercises with both Russia and Uzbekistan for several years. But military action is not the only option. In a broad-based assault, the Bush administration will push hard for diplomatic and economic sanctions against any terrorist state.
Jim Miklaszewski, thank you. Ambassador Hussein Haqqani, will Pakistan allow not only U.S. overflights, but Pakistani military bases to be used by an alliance, an anti-bin Laden alliance?
Well, my understanding is that General Musharraf's military regime is considering what can be done. They have assured the United States that they will cooperate, but what will be the exact nature of the cooperation is something that I believe is being discussed right now. The Pakistani intelligence chief is in Washington, D.C. He's discussing it presumably with all his counterparts there. And General Musharraf received the American ambassador in Islamabad. And I've understood that he assured her that we will support. Now, how that support manifests itself will depend on a number of factors. It has been argued in the past that there are extremists within Pakistan. So the United States will have to assure Pakistan that since Pakistan is all of this is closer to home to Pakistan, that Pakistan will not become the target of terrorist reprisals, because after these guys are taken out in Afghanistan, they will still have elements left around. And then we have to contend with the basic issue. How did all of this happen? How did these people become terrorists? Well, a lot of them are people who are angry.
Yes, I agree.
Who are angry about foreign policy issues. And so the United States will also have to offer some reassurance.
I hear you. Okay, let me go to Alan Dershowitz on that point. You know, yesterday, in the rare moment of discord on the program, there was a debate over whether or not what is at the heart of this this rage in the Arab/Muslim world isn't Israel and U.S. unequivocal support over the years for the state of Israel. Is there a danger that Israel and Jews will become scapegoated in this?
Well, it's already happening in Europe. I was on some radio talk shows in Europe where Israel is being scapegoated. Look, this thing was in the planning stage for years. Even if Israel and the Palestinians had made peace pursuant to the Camp David Accords, where Israel offered back much of what Palestinians wanted, this terrorist act would have gone on. Osama bin Laden is interested in destabilizing moderate Arab countries and destabilizing American democracy. Israel is the excuse. But can I make a very important proposal? You know, I think Americans have to remain united here. This is bipartisanship, and we can't get into a situation where civil libertarians are seen as the enemy, or the people who are trying to prosecute are seen as the enemy by civil libertarians. I want to propose that we do what Canada did. When it imposed the War Measures Act back in 1970, it put together a group of prominent and distinguished civil libertarians. I was invited from America to be part of that group, to advise and consult with the government together, to work together, to plan activities which would satisfy civil libertarian concerns and also be smart and effective. We're going to have to make compromises with civil liberties. It's far better to do it with civil libertarians in the tent than outside the tent. So I think we ought to, in the spirit of bipartisanship, the Justice Department ought to invite some civil libertarians to sit down and talk to them and plan for the future so that we're all in this together and we're not in an adversarial position.
Well, let me ask, I want to go back to Ambassador Hussein Haqqani. You know, imagine if you and Farah, who used to be my producer, your beloved wife, were in the United States right now. You know how people might be looking at you. What if you had to travel through an airport right now? You know, aren't you, in a way, glad you're not in the United States? Don't you fear for the hundreds of thousands, millions of American Muslims, particularly those who look more Semitic than others, that they will be harassed? Some words of harassment already coming down the pike.
Geraldo, we would have felt exactly the way the Americans feel about these terrorists. I mean, it's not fair to racially profile people. It's not fair to assume that all Muslims and Arabs, many of whom feel the rage, many of whom may actually be actively cooperating with the United States effort, and many of whom would be assets, very important assets in any effort to deal with these terrorists. And in fact, the kind of little incidents that one has heard about of people taking out their rage on average Arab Americans or average Muslim Americans, I think that is only going to spoil the chances of being able to isolate the terrorists and their supporters.
Geraldo, could I make a point?
I think we should get a...
Just add one quick point.
Go ahead,
one quick point. I think that what the American government and the American media in particular now have to realize that the American people have probably become very aware. Now, in my various travels to the United States, I have felt that the average American doesn't take much of an interest in international affairs because they think it's all very remote. Well, now they have graphic images of what happens far away from the United States can have repercussions inside the United States. So I think American foreign policy has to become more important, and the Americans have to start addressing issues that they have not addressed in the past.
I think you're right. General Dawkins?
Yeah, Geraldo, I think we can make a distinction here that would maybe be helpful to everybody. We're talking about this being the face of war in the 21st century, the first war of this country in the 21st century, and I believe it is exactly that. But let me just make one quick distinction. We have been attacked. We need to attack back. That is part of a battle, and this war will have a number of battles. On the other hand, a war is an extended campaign. When Alan Dershowitz talks about getting civil libertarians immobilized and partners, that's very important. Another piece of this that's going to be very critical is the whole intelligence structure. People have asked the question, is this an intelligence failure? Well, yes, it is. We should have known. But one of the problems is that we've moved the balance between human intelligence and technical intelligence, in my judgment, too far toward technical intelligence.
Too much reliance on satellites and not enough people on the ground.
Exactly, and we are going to have to rebuild that balance in our intelligence structure. We're going to have to be in this for a very long campaign.
I hope some of this $20 billion gets spent on exactly that. I wonder, Commissioner Kelly, did you ever, in your long and distinguished career, when you've done so much to make the cities of Boston and New York safe, when you worked your ass off at Customs, did you ever expect an enemy to come in the form of an American domestic airliner filled with innocent people that came flying down the Hudson River and collided into the, this colossal symbol of American capitalism?
Never. After the 1993 bombing, of course, where the terrorists failed to topple the World Trade Center, that's what they tried to do in '93. We thought that that building, and there was a lot of talk in this regard, that it was almost invulnerable. You could never take that building down. And to see that site on Tuesday, where 2 aircraft up 80 stories high demolished those 2 buildings, it was just incredible. It was beyond anyone's imagination. Certainly anyone, I think, in law enforcement could never envision that. So again, it has changed our world tremendously. We'll probably never be the same, but it is an opportunity now for us to rethink so many things. As General Dawkins said, intelligence. I think that's where we have put all our eggs virtually in the intelligence basket, and it failed us. We need to rethink how we've done it. Not so much in resources. I think there's been plenty of resources. It's philosophy. It's approach to how we do business.
Let me go right now live to Dan Lothian, our colleague from NBC News at LAX. I know New York shut down, Dan. What's the state of the rest of the airport and the rest of the flights?
Well, Geraldo, you know, the past couple of days here, it's been a virtual ghost town, but today some life into the airport. But officials telling us that they're not really running on all cylinders. In fact, they don't expect things to be up and going at least even to 50% until this weekend, and then 100% by the end of next week. Now, take a look behind me. We're here at the American Airlines gate or terminal area, and a few people showing up here. And then over here to my left, the board that we always look to find out where our flights are going. A lot of red on that board. There are some flights that aren't in red, but probably won't be going anywhere tonight. Officials telling us that they'll have to take some small steps to make sure that everything is online, that everything is as the FAA would like it to be before they put those airplanes into the sky.
What's it like there? What's it like with the cops and everything? Yeah.
You know, when you're here, you see a lot of cops circling around the airport. Every few minutes, you'll see them go by on motorcycles. They're at just about every door here, and certainly all the restrictions that you've been hearing so much about. You can no longer check in at curbside. If you don't have a ticket, you can't go to the gate. You can't go past the security area. So certainly the restrictions are tight. In fact, if you're coming to the airport, unless you're taking a taxi cab or coming by one of those town cars or by a shuttle bus, you cannot just come and drive up here like you could on Monday. You have to go to a parking lot on the perimeter, catch that shuttle bus or that cab, and then come here to the airport.
Dan, it's going to be a mess, at least until the weekend, probably not until Monday. I don't think travel is going to be anything near normal. If they've got police investigations going on at the 3 New York airports now, you can imagine what a mess it's going to be.
That's true, but you know, one thing is that as you talk to the passengers who have been able to come in here today, many of them are saying, well, yeah, it's a bit frustrating that they now have to pay this price for what these terrorists have done here in our country, but nonetheless, they feel that this is the right thing to do, so they can feel safe.
I agree, and I really do believe, and you know, I don't want to make a speech here, ladies and gentlemen, but I really do believe that this is the time for all of us to do what Congress did, join ranks, shoulder to shoulder, Republican, Democrat, rich, poor, black, white, stand shoulder to shoulder, get the American flags out, sing God Bless America, give blood, donate. I heard General Electric's going to give $10 million, Microsoft $10 million, other companies are saying they'll match any contribution their employees make to help these victims ease the awful transition. Most of the people killed, obviously breadwinners for their families. This is going to be a real test, not just of the armed forces of the United States, and my God, you know that's going to be a mighty, mighty test. They will be sorely, sorely tested by a very, very difficult military situation.
administration. But the test really falls on all of our shoulders now, to put aside the partisan rancor, to forget about labels like liberal and conservative, and just stand together as proud citizens of the world's shining beacon right there. Right there, that symbol that stands. They didn't take down the Statue of Liberty. That still stands in New York Harbor. All of us have to be together now and face this enemy and defeat them with our confidence. But you know something, I'm telling you, Christopher Whitcomb, I spent a lot of time in Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley, right outside Beirut. I was in Beirut with the IDF. I was in Beirut after they blew up the Marine Corps barracks, took out 200 of our people there. The Bekaa was only, you know, a couple of score miles away. They're still there. The rat terrorists are still in the Bekaa. You know, what makes it any more likely that we're going to take them out of Afghanistan if we couldn't get them out of the Bekaa, which is, you know, a stone's throw away?
Well, you know, I think one thing we haven't talked about, Geraldo, is we have a history of doing this in the past. We've gone after people before, and we've brought them back to justice in the United States. And we're really breaking this down now between a military campaign and a civilian law enforcement operation to bring these people back to justice. We went after Fawaz Yunus in the mid-1980s. We've gone after Miriam Al-Khanzi and Ramzi Youssef. We've gone after many people, found them in foreign countries who reached out all over the world and brought them back to justice in the United States. So I think before we give up entirely on the justice aspect of this thing and go strictly in the military, we have to look at the options. I mean, we can go out, reach out, try to find people around Osama bin Laden, perhaps even moving toward him, and bring them back to justice in the United States, or we can punish in place with the military. It's two dramatically different avenues that we're taking here. Maybe the solution is bringing all of them together, working with the intelligence community.
I'm reminded of Teddy Roosevelt when an American woman was kidnapped in Northern Africa by a brigand and taken into the mountains. He said he wanted the woman alive or the bandit dead. And you know, I would love to have Osama bin Laden head as a paperweight on my desk.
But Geraldo, it's so important that we not take the argument that we have to understand these terrorists, we have to give in to their anger, we have to change our foreign policy because of terrorism. These are people who hate, and we do not have to accede to their hatred. The very good thing that was said today by our Secretary of State and our Undersecretary of Defense is that Hezbollah and Hamas are also terrorist organizations which are supported by Syria and Iraq and other such countries, and no longer can we tolerate, as we have for 30 years, terrorism as a tactic if we or some people approve of the ends it's intended to serve. I think it would be a terrible mistake to change our foreign policy as the result of terrorism. That will only encourage more terrorism. You stand up to terrorists, you don't give in to terrorists, you change foreign policies only on the merits of the foreign policy.
Let me go back to Ambassador Haqqani, I have to ask you a question. I just am now recalling what you said, that the Osama bin Laden aide told you, don't bother taking out Osama because even if you do succeed, there are all these other cells around. Is that basically his argument? Don't kill this cockroach because even if you do, there's lots of other cockroaches around?
Well, his real argument is that he may not directly be involved, and yes,
you buy that? You buy that, Ambassador?
Well, I don't think that there is a distinction has to be made between direct involvement and inspiration. If nothing else, he's definitely the inspiration for all these cells, even though they may plan and execute their plans independently. But he does bankroll them, and he has conceptualized all of this. Let me just say that just as they attacked the symbols of American power, taking him out or attacking him would be an attack on the symbol of their power and the symbol of their spiritual or whatever motivation that they have. So therefore, I think there's a symbolism involved in there as well.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So it doesn't matter that we don't have to kill the whole species of cockroach. You can kill the king cockroach. They took out our tallest buildings. Okay. They took out a tick in our financial heart. But they didn't kill us. It was a symbolic attack, so we'll do that too. Take out Osama bin Laden. At the very least, it is a great symbolic victory.
But he's planning other activities as we speak, and these other activities may be more serious, and that's why we must target him and get him now.
Geraldo, if I could add to that, I think.
Go ahead, Neil. Go ahead.
I think you're going to see that on the contingency planning right now, I would suspect that many more than just the Afghan targets are on the target list. because Osama bin Laden is basically, his organization is spread out over perhaps as many as a dozen countries. And you may see some of those organizations like Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the crosshairs right now as well, including their training camps in the Bekaa and other places.
Let me ask General Dawkins, you know, during the war in Southeast Asia, I remember, like, my friend Vic Furio, a decorated Marine who was at Quezon, but he was also with in the bush, hiding in the trees, going with locals to try and ferret out the Viet Cong leadership, or, you know, their officers. That we went. Have we totally walked away from that? I mean, do we have any, any substantial numbers of our people on the ground trying to blend in, trying to get close?
Well, certainly not in Afghanistan at this stage, but as a principle, we haven't relinquished that at all. But I think there's a mistake, Geraldo, in comparing this with Vietnam. Vietnam was a campaign in itself. It was a war. I believe very strongly that what we need to do is we need to attack bin Laden's organization as a battle, get in, punish, and then get back out, and initiate a much more broadly based campaign against this worldwide phenomenon of hate and terrorism. And you were asking, what are the things that we have to do differently if our world has changed? And I come back again to that matter of preemption. I can't underscore too much how important that is. That we cannot sit back on our haunches and wait till something happens and react. We have got to understand this phenomenon, understand their motivation, understand their determination, and be prepared to go out and preempt them from doing things that we know they're going to try to do before we give them a chance to do it.
Absolutely.
Just recapping, 18 hijackers now, according to the Department of Justice, on the aircraft, as many as 50 total involved. Flight training received in at least 2 locations now, 7 or 8 Middle Eastern men posing, some of them as pilots, seized reportedly at 2 New York airports. Alan Dershowitz, you're Mr. Constitution. You know, I honor your expertise in the area of that great document, above all others living. You know, I put Fred Friendly, you know, he's probably the only one of your peer, and he's gone now. So, okay, there you are. Should we, unlike Vietnam, unlike Korea, unlike many other actions, Panama, you know, and many others, should we, in this case, the president has said we are at war. Commentators ranging from General Dawkins to the Vice President of the United States have suggested this is the first war in the 21st century for the United States of America. Should the president convene the joint houses of Congress and ask, as the Constitution mandates, for a declaration of war against Osama bin Laden and others named and unnamed?
Well, we have a precedent for this. We did declare war against the Barbary pirates in the 19th century. There is a common law tradition of pirates being outlaws. Terrorists are simply 21st century pirates. I think it would bring America together if we had a joint declaration of Congress, if we authorized the president to do it. It would eliminate any claims of constitutional issues such as bothered civil libertarians during the Vietnam War. So I see no good reason for not at least having hearings and considering that as a realistic option. Again, it's another example of civil libertarians working together with the other parts of the government to bring about a resolution that brings us together instead of divides us into adversaries, as in the Vietnam War. We do not want another experience such as that during the Vietnam War. We must remain united this time.
I send my firm embrace to the President of the United States, George W. Bush, when he cried today. It made me cry. His wife, a noble woman, standing bravely by his side. Whatever minor missteps he made in the hours after the initial assault, I don't blame him at all. That's the Secret Service reaction. They took over when perhaps they should not have. But this is the time again when we're all going to stand together. But I want to go to Commissioner Raymond Kelly and ask you this. All right, here's what we got, Commish. We've got new rules at the airport. They're not even going to have cutlery. They're not even going to have knives served with your meals on the aircraft. They're not going to allow even the Swiss Army knives or rug cutters. They've abolished curbside check-in. But don't you think given that this is a free and open society, given the fact that these rules are now promulgated near and far on programs like this one, that the terrorists are watching CNN or CNBC or Fox or MSNBC, and they're saying, okay, that's what we won't do. Next time we'll do something. You know, it's so easy. They could have had a vessel, for instance, packed full of plastique or one of these diesel fuel bombs and parked it at the base of the train. You know what I mean? Isn't there? Won't there always, in an open and free society, be vulnerabilities?
Yes, yes, there will. I think we have to bring our best minds together to continually think about these issues. We've let it drift. Let's face it, terrorism basically is something that happened away from our shores. Now it's hit home in this dramatic, terrible fashion. We've got to consistently look at this, use our best minds to continue to watch it as it evolves. You're right, they're smart. These are not dumb people that we're dealing with. They're going to be on top of all of these issues.
You know, and Pete, I just want to say this. You know, it is now very apparent to everyone, General Dawkins, that we have suffered twice the casualties that the Japanese inflicted on us in the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. As a military hero, your response to the carnage, the scope, the depth of what we have suffered.
Well, it's a massive thing, Geraldo. Not only is it larger than Pearl Harbor, it matches the largest single-day loss, if it were a military operation, of military forces in history. It was the day at Antietam. It's an extraordinary dimension. But I'd like to just add one dimension to this, if I could, Geraldo.
Okay.
You mentioned it in an editorial you wrote this week. You know, we not only have to fight this campaign, wage this war, but you talk about symbolism. We also need to rebuild. We need to demonstrate to ourselves and to the world, adversaries and allies alike, that we're not going to stand for this. We're going to build it back bigger, brighter, better than ever. We're going to do it together. And that, as much as anything else, is part of the strength of what we need to bring to this extensive campaign in what is America's first war.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of our guests. We're out of time. I want to give you a heads up. We usually aren't on the air on Friday night. We're going to stay on the air. We'll be here tomorrow night. We'll be covering this just as vigorously as we can, trying to be as helpful as we can be. I want to thank you very much for watching. God bless America. In a moment, the news with Brian Williams. But right now, I'd like to go. You know, this is a business story also, as much as it is a human story. So we have a special business news update from CNBC's Ted David. Here's Ted. Thank you for watching.
All right, Geraldo, thank you. Good evening. After a test this weekend, stock markets here in the United States will reopen on Monday. Today, the bond market was open after being closed for 2 days. And when all was said and done today, the 10-year note was down, as you can see, as was the 30-year bond. Let's take a look at stock markets, which are open for trading on the other side of the world, where it is already Friday morning. We start off with Tokyo, the Nikkei, currently up 123 points, and the Straits Times Index at this hour, let's take a quick look, is currently down 12 points on the trading session. Of course, as this tragedy continues to play out, the dead and the injured remain prominent in our hearts and minds, and we leave you this hour with these very special thoughts.
It's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went off. We don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and we just wanted you to know that I love you always.
This is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
I've been trying to beat a lot of stuff in my life. This is hell.
Many, we don't know how many yet, never made it out of the buildings.
There is a tremendous amount of hope still in the city.
We know he's there.
We know he's strong. We know he can make it. So please, God, help him.
Are there any good stories to tell him at this point?
Everyone out there is a hero. Every single person's a hero out there.
And good evening to our viewers on CNBC. This is the scene in Lower Manhattan, the plume of some smoke, some dust in a city where rain is predicted tonight and could play a role in what remains of the investigation and certainly what remains of the huge job of rescue and recovery. There, the Statue of Liberty, which all Americans like to think is looking over Lower Manhattan as she has for so many decades, but really meaning it this time as the people of this city and this nation need her more than ever, it's been argued. Hundreds of rescue workers are there looking for thousands of missing people. The number of missing, 4,700 people in just that one incident alone. While in Washington tonight, we are covering a small fire at the Pentagon at this hour as we come on the air. Water's on the fire and things are back under control there at the Pentagon, one of the hot spots that flared up after that disaster, the commercial jetliner that had hit that building. But at 10 o'clock, here are the stories we are looking at. 18 hijackers have been identified by the Justice Department, the names not released. These were the men who took the aircraft, it's alleged, and not all the plotters. And before that list is over, that could number 50, and there could be some more names added to that because of detentions and arrests tonight. The president will travel to New York tomorrow. Additionally, he has asked all Americans to pause during their lunch hour and attend the house of worship of their choice to pray for the dead, the wounded, and for this nation. Wall Street will reopen Monday. This is the longest period of inactivity on what should have been a trading day in all of American history. They've been too worried about trying to get the thousands of Wall Street workers down to that torn apart section of the city, too worried that the wires, the infrastructure would not support trading. It'll be the longest shutdown ever. They're testing Saturday for all the systems. It was a day of some setbacks and some great achievements in New York. The recovery after the terrorist attacks. We have the story from NBC News correspondent David Bloom.
Amid the rubble today, life. He's alive. He's alive. Rescue workers erupt in cheers as at least 3 firefighters are pulled from the ruins of the World Trade Center. According to eyewitness accounts, these 3 men were not buried on Tuesday. They were trapped today as debris shifted and other nearby buildings collapsed. Firefighter Glenn Ray reached down to touch what he thought was a lifeless hand.
There was, yes, there was a man alive, yes.
Did he squeeze your hand? I mean,
he scratched my top of my knuckle.
Yeah, okay.
Tonight, even more harrowing news. What's left of the World Trade Center's South Tower may be about to collapse. But someone, a woman rescuers believe, is tapping for help. Even though the south side of the South Tower might be about to collapse.
Right, someone's tapping from below. Survival.
And you guys are staying.
A lot of guys stay, yes.
It is a gut-wrenching day in New York City. Bomb scares forcing evacuations at the railroad station, historic Grand Central, and at LaGuardia airports. Search dogs scour the rubble. Long lines of emergency workers pass buckets of debris, even as surveyors watch to see which buildings are buckling, swaying, about to collapse. It's nerve-rattling, especially for volunteers like Brooklyn medic Rona Chambers.
I don't know what came down. I don't know what that was all about. Everybody just ran. People were just like, running over each other to get out. So that's all I know. I wish I knew more.
And you're not going back?
No, well, I've been there since the second plane hit, so that's 3 days and I'm done.
But firefighter John Marabito vows to stay.
The shock that overcame me in the initial blast, I was in the building, and the shock that overcame me sent me home, and I needed to rest. And then I had to come back here and help find my brothers and help find people that are missing and do my job.
Loved ones search in vain for the missing. Paul DiMartini passing out a picture of his brother Frank.
It's my only hope. I mean, obviously people might look at it as futile, but what else? They won't let me dig, and I can't blame them for that, but what else can I do?
And yet the rescue workers, dazed, covered in soot, stay. American flags flying, hopes soaring, however briefly, when, as today, 3 men stand up and walk out of the rubble alive.
David Bloom's report from earlier today. As we have mentioned, many of those who have seen death in the last few days, be they co-workers or rescue workers, may need a word or two of comfort and or a lot more. And so grief counselors, any and all people available who've been trained in that delicate line of work, are streaming into Lower Manhattan. Among them, Rabbi Jay Rosenbaum. He is with us from the what's been known as the Grief Center, really the New York Armory. Rabbi, what kinds of cases are you seeing? Who are you talking to?
I'm talking to the family members, parents, children, grieving wives and husbands, people who have come here to do something for their loved ones. They come with faith, they come with hope, and they realize that the unspeakable might be the answer they ultimately receive. And we stand here, clergy of all faiths, from all services. I am the chaplain of the New York State Division of Parole and spiritual leader of Temple Israel in Jamaica. We stand here with these people in prayer and make a statement that what happens to one person of faith anywhere affects all people of faith everywhere. This past Tuesday, America lost its innocence. And part of the response has to be in prayer and in using constructively the unused years of those lives that were snuffed out in that instance.
Rabbi, it reminds me of the title of a great book written by a religious man, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. How can you...
Yes, Rabbi Kushner.
Yes, exactly. How can you possibly explain to perhaps a small child why a parent isn't around anymore? Their only sin Tuesday was showing up to work and sitting down at their desk on time.
One answer that I do not give is that it's God's will. It is not God's will. It was an act of madness. It was an accident. It was a tragedy. And I tell that child that they will always remember their father, their mother, that their parent is with God in heaven above, and that connection will always remain, that they will live on within them, and that they can feel their grief, that they are entitled to their anger, their pain, their anguish and agony. I sit with them and I cry with them. I'd like to read a letter written by some children of my religious school this afternoon.
Please do.
They joined with me on a special service to ask for the recovery of those who were injured and pray for the souls of those who perished. And it's to the firefighters, police officers, and rescue workers. And they write, "Thank you for rescuing my dad. Thanks again." And this was written by Stern Christian, 3rd grade, PS 98, Queens. And all of us have so many of these young people who are searching for answers. But most of all, they are looking to us for strength, for hope, and for courage. And that we are there to give them now and in all their tomorrows.
With 4,700 people listed as missing, and I mean in no way for this to sound crass as an expression, how can everyone who needs it get the kind of personalized service that they should during such a moment of crisis?
I've spoken to my colleagues in the religious community in New York and across the country. We are here as long as it takes, whatever it takes. We are there for our people, for all people collectively, and for those who grieve individually. That is the job of the spiritual leader, to help, to comfort, to be there whenever, through it all.
Rabbi Jay Rosenbaum, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you additionally for coming on our broadcast tonight from Lower Manhattan. New York City this evening is a city, especially below about 14th Street, of a lot of empty restaurants and empty streets and a lot of empty apartments and homes of people who never came back from work on Tuesday. We mentioned the number of missing, 4,700 people. Some people are surviving only on hope. We get one such story from Dateline NBC correspondent Edie Magnus.
The city is beginning to dig itself out, and a terrible truth is emerging too. The chances that loved ones missing since the attacks will be found are getting slimmer. It is one of many cruel twists to this tragedy that the chaos of those first 24 hours offered more hope that relatives, neighbors, or co-workers might be found. But now, it is day 3. What to do? Where to go? Jennifer Marvison finally left her home today. She's been too shocked and depressed until now, she tells us, to look for her fiancé, Keith Broomfeld.
This is the first I was able to face the world. I haven't been out. So this is the day that I'm going to find out, do or die, whatever it is I have to find out.
Jennifer's come to Bellevue Hospital to post a homemade flyer with Keith's picture on it here on what's called a wall of prayers. It has sprung up and, like a plant watered with tears, is growing steadily, covered with the pictures of missing people. Against a backdrop of spectacular blue skies and balmy weather, scores of people, emotional refugees, are wandering the city, looking, hoping, wondering what to do next about the ones they love but cannot find. Sean Fagan, 34, a trader on the 93rd floor of Tower 1, somewhere above where the first plane hit. His sister, Anne Marie, says there's been no word of him since that blast. She hit the streets this morning armed with 400 flyers and has been asking questions everywhere.
So you've been to the armory, the morgue?
No.
You have not gone to the morgue yet?
No.
Why not?
I'm hoping that my brother's not there.
What keeps you going?
Like, the alternative isn't, it's not an option. My brother's not okay, and until someone tells me he's not, then he is.
Countless others are feeling the same way, unable to let go of the possibility that their loved ones may be out there somewhere. So they're out too, posting pictures on phone booths, mailboxes, at the entrance of buildings. And after all, more survivors were rescued from the bloody rubble of the Twin Towers today. Maybe the answers are on this list. It's been pulled from the internet. Its accuracy is unknown. But it claims to contain information on the condition of many victims of the plane attacks.
Please don't give up hope.
This woman says she actually did find out her missing brother is alive by seeing his name on this list.
He's injured, but we found him.
Lorraine Browse has also been given a grain of hope. She's learned from the company on the 95th floor where her stepmother worked that someone had sighted her. Lorraine doesn't know exactly what that means. Could her stepmother still be alive, unconscious in a hospital? Or is it false information?
No, they don't have any specific information. All they had was her name on a list. It was very vague. It didn't really tell us much, but at least we know if she was alive, if she had survived, she has to be in the hospital someplace.
Lorraine was told to go to a downtown university to check a list of hospitalized victims.
I know it's going to take a miracle if she's alive. She was so high up in the building. We know she went in early that morning because she had gone to vote beforehand.
As she waits, she takes her place on a line among many others. The crowd, a sobering reminder of how widespread the suffering is. Finally, she gets a look.
Nothing.
No information?
They have partial hospital lists. She wasn't on any of the lists. There's nothing else we can do now.
Except wait and worry and pray that soon they will get an answer. Until then, they will have to keep looking here in this city of lost and found.
Do you still have hope that you'll find him?
Yeah, I hope that I find him.
I have to find my brother either way. So, but we will find my brother one way or the other.
Just some of what is going on in New York this week, and every family walking the streets has a different story. Edie Magnus from Dateline NBC, one of the soldiers on the front lines who we got to know on live television last night, has come back to join us tonight. Frank Donahue, a Red Cross volunteer. Frank, that was emotional stuff last night. And how has it changed today? Because we have gone another day without bringing in a lot of wounded. We've got a list of missing people, 4,700 names long.
Man, it's been another emotional day, Brian. I think for the many hundreds of people. I started the day down around the former World Trade Center and spent most of the day up at the Armory. We call it the Compassion Center, where literally people wrapped around the city block looking to get in that building and look at lists of folks that may have appeared or showed up in hospitals and are yet to be identified. The emotions, the stories, they're countless. The brochures that people put up all over New York. It's quite, I was just coming here tonight listening to a man talk as I was walking down the street, and he was telling his friends, just crying in Midtown, that one of his really good friends was on the phone to her husband when the building collapsed, and she's not been discovered. And those stories are stories, constantly all day long. So it's been quite an emotional day.
Frank, tell me something. I mean, every family in this area has been affected by this. Just about everybody I know has some connection to someone who was in this Trade Center attack. For these families we see, we tried to give a lot of them airtime earlier today. For the families we see holding up pictures, has anyone seen this person? We're looking for information. Can it be said that if those people were alive, if they had staggered out of the wreckage, if they had made it, they would have by now been identified, sent messages, doctors would have made some. Can it be said that all those people looking for people are looking for people who are still trapped in the rubble?
Well, I think hope is so important right now for folks. The folks I talked to today, many of them are holding on to the thinnest hope that someone is alive, maybe laying unconscious in a hospital without any identification.
Right.
And that picture that a hospital worker sees on a pole might be their daughter, their wife, their husband, and that's what people are hoping for. So
that could dislodge a memory. That could be the spark that gets somebody to act.
But we're talking of thousands and thousands of people.
I know it,
Brian. It's quite staggering.
And there's nothing wrong with hope, and sometimes that's all that gets you through.
But I'll tell you, the New Yorkers, again, people are starting to go back to work here in New York. Traffic was heavy, and people are everywhere. That spirit of patriotism and that spirit of people wanting to do more and help each other has really been incredible. I met some kids down in the World Trade Center that happened to be working in a Red Cross canteen. We have 41 of them going throughout the city of New York, our ERVs, our emergency response vehicles. And these were kids from colleges like NYU that were just giving their time to be there and to help hand out water and make sandwiches and do things. Some kids from a local school made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and wrapped them with notes and a Hershey Kiss for the workers at the Armory today. Just people everywhere in New York, everywhere, were holding up flags, thanking the workers and thanking different organizations that have responded. I got to say, the spirit in New York has been incredible. So if that kind of spirit and energy combined with the hope that so many people I saw today can help the thousands that are missing be, hope is alive.
Now, Frank, I have to ask, are you ready? The rough part is ahead here. I know if you had a magic wand, you'd wave it and bring all those loved ones back, all those crying people we saw all day today. But the rough go is when the dogs get in there in the wreckage, and it takes days and it takes weeks, and we start learning names and lists, and it's really going to be awful.
And those days, Brian, are not too far away. The heat's been a lot here in New York. It's been very hot for this time of year. Sooner or later, they're going to have to move a lot more aggressively to start looking for the lost folks. And clearly, the emotional toll on the people that we saw today that still have that hope is going to get greater. That's why the mental health counseling. Yesterday, I think we had 460 mental health volunteers, certified mental health volunteers working at a variety of locations to provide support for people, just to talk to them, just to be with them, to let them tell the story about their son or their daughter or their wife. That's such an important part of this process, and that's going to become increasingly important.
Right. We've had several grief counselors here on this broadcast tonight talking about that very dynamic. We'll ask the same question we asked you last night. Is there anything you folks need? Because New Yorkers keep asking us what's needed.
I think increasingly patience is going to be the needed gift that we could give each other today. We don't have all the answers, and looking for loved ones, calling Red Cross and calling and stopping by and trying to find them, it's going to take a long time to connect people, to answer all the questions, and people are going to have to be increasingly patient in a very, very difficult situation. And I think that's something we could all give each other at this time, and as you said, as it's going to get tougher.
All right. Well, Frank Donahue, Red Cross volunteer, thank you very much for coming on. Again, having first met Frank last night, we thought we would get an update on the situation there, the volunteer effort in New York. We mentioned this earlier. We had a small fire flare-up, adding insult to injury at the Pentagon after the attack there by one of the commercial jetliners. Correspondent Nora O'Donnell is at the Pentagon. Nora, what was it, did it turn out?
Brian, well, a late night scare for about the hundreds of firefighters or investigators that have been working round the clock inside the Pentagon. Sources now say what happened is that it actually was a pool of jet fuel that ignited. They have told us from the beginning that this plane that crashed into the Pentagon was carrying some 6,000 gallons of jet fuel. Of course, a loaded plane full of